Part 2. Continuing on now with a second occupation, for those of you who are going to be working on air, is the broadcast journalist. Broadcast journalism. It's a course that we have here at ESU. We have a lot of students that go into this occupation who come out of our broadcasting concentration. In actual fact, almost everybody at some point becomes a broadcast journalist. If there's breaking news like the coronavirus and you're a disc jockey, you announce it. What are broadcast journalists? Well, first of all, they're great storytellers. So if you like telling stories, broadcast journalism is just another outlet for you to be able to do that. Also, you get to go to new places every single day. You don't know what you're going to be covering. You're going to cover wherever the crime is. You're going to cover wherever the new groundbreaking ceremonies are, the parades. You get to move around, do different things every single day. You're not going into the same cubicle. Also, it's for a person who likes to convey complex ideas simply and directly. I don't mean that the thought process is simple. I mean that you're able to take complex ideas and scale them down into an understandable format. Next up is the idea that broadcast journalists really should be in the mindset of trying to pursue the truth. That's what you're trying to do, to get to the truth. You hear a lot of that being talked about right now if you're politically inclined and you're watching the daily briefings from the White House and the back and forth between journalists that is taking place, in particular between the president and certain reporters, and most notably those from CNN. And the reporters are all responding to what they perceive as being an attack on journalism by saying that they are pursuing the truth. And so I'm not offering this example to make commentary on the president. I'm offering this to say that a journalist at least should see themselves as pursuing the truth. Now, what version of the truth is going to be up to you, the listener, and to the journalists to sort that out between you, not, of course, in the same space, but the idealism of truth pursuit is what this is about. Also, broadcast journalists are gatekeepers. They do a lot of deciding for others about what is considered to be important. We even have a theory about this effect in mass media. It's called the agenda setting theory. And the idea is that media don't tell you what to think so much as they tell you what to think about. So we're going to continue on now and say that the next idea is that broadcast journalists have news values, that they have news values which helps guide their selection of the news story and then positions them as a gatekeeper. So you can read about the values in the chapter. I'm not going to go over all of them, but for example, one might be significance of the event, and is the event significant to whom? If a new park is built in your municipality, who is that significant to? It's not significant to somebody living just a mile away across the bridge, and so that's a news value that will guide whether you decide to cover that story or not. Some of the positions, the sub-positions that are involved in being a broadcast journalist include copywriters. Copywriters don't actually do any announcing. You find them in big city news stations like KYW in Philadelphia or KDKA in Pittsburgh or WINS in New York. These are all news stations. They're just writers. And then they have other professional announcers. You've also got a news director. A news director is a person who is the head of the department. In radio, you don't typically have more than one person working for a radio station unless it's a big radio station in the area of news. But at larger stations, big market stations, and certainly at television, you have news directors which oversee the reporters. Another position is assignment editor. Assignment editor, or the assignment desk as it is called. That's a person who's constantly monitoring the emergency communications going on, fire and ambulances and police, and also getting tips on stories from listeners. And that person is putting together really the agenda for what reporters are going to go out and cover. The assignment editor is a position that exists in television, does not exist in radio. Another position that's a sub-position in broadcast journalism is the general assignment reporter. That's where you cover anything and everything, whatever is deemed to be newsworthy by you and or your news director, that's where you're going to cover. Something that happens in television that does not happen in radio with this position is stand-ups. And that's where the television journalist, the reporter, goes out into the field, collects some video of the parade, the fair, the car crash, whatever it is. And then you're also gathering testimony. We call it sound bites or video bites. It's really a person who's a suspect or a witness. You capture them, and then you come back to the studio, or increasingly in your own equipment with the mobile units that they have available today. You edit it and you put together a package. Then an anchor is going to introduce that package. You see it over and over in the news. I'm sure that you're familiar with it. Some reporters are beat reporters. That means they have a specialty of content that they're covering on a weekly basis or a daily basis, and that's their beat. Could be education, could be the economy, could be crime, could be sports. They're beat reporters. You've also got you've also got stringers that are in broadcast journalists. Stringers are freelancers. They work just on a per story basis, and they're not aligned with any one particular company. They can work for NBC, they can work for ABC, they can work for Fox. They are freelancers. That's what stringers are. And then you have the cream of the crop for many people aspiring to this position. That's the anchor. They have the most prestige. They are the ones that most of the news is focused upon because they're delivering the news. They're emceeing the newscast, if you want to look at it that way. They also have, at least on the TV side, a cosmetic appeal to them. They have to be have a certain standard of good-lookingness by today's standards, whatever those may be. So there's a very visual dimension. All right, let's move on to the next position now, which is the sports announcer. We've already said a few things about sports announcer, so we'll add to that now. And sports announcing is thriving. It's thriving because the big money in sports is being made by copyrights, by licensing, by the ability of media to have access to a sporting event and then to broadcast that sporting event. And people like that, especially in a corona day and age. And one of the biggest things missing from people's lives is sports and the ability to watch other people play, which is essentially what sports is. But because of all the different means of capturing sports in media content, television, radio, audio, and because of the demand for sports, particularly among parents with kids that go through the sports system and seeing sports as an outlet that will keep kids away from drugs and other bad influences, sports in the United States is thriving. But sports is also thriving for another reason. That's because advertisers like to advertise during sporting events. They like it because people are viewing sporting events normally in real time. And that's very different from how other kinds of TV viewing and radio listening goes on today with podcasts and TiVo and other means of archiving media content. Sports is viewed live, otherwise it's old news because the score is out there, and unless you're going to watch a classic World Series game or Super Bowl, people don't usually watch sports in the past tense. Advertisers like that. They like to have their sports message delivered in real time so that people can act upon it. And plus, if something goes out of date in whatever the media content is, then by association, the advertisement would be out of date too. So they don't want, if at all possible, their ads to be paired up with content that is not live. Also, advertisers like sports because most sports is viewed on big screen TVs, which makes their advertising even bigger. People are not watching basketball on their phones that much. They might watch a replay, might watch one play replayed back, but people don't normally watch sports on their phones. They watch them on the big screen, which makes the ads bigger. The different positions within sports we've covered in this class before. You got your play-by-play announcer, your color announcer. The play-by-play does each individual event that's happening in the sport. The color fills in with the history of the player, fills in with the background of the rivalry between the two teams, the change in uniforms, anything that's going to add description and add to the story. One of the pieces of equipment that sports announcers work with quite a bit is the telestrator, especially in football and other grid-related sports. You draw out the play to help the audience understand. So that's a new skill, relatively new skill that sports announcers have to have. Sports announcers sometimes have off-air assistants, either spotters. These are people that are trying to look for a particular action and grab certain notes to then relay to the sports announcer, because the sports announcer can't see every person on the field at one time. You may be looking at this end of the field and something happens over here that you should talk about. That's what the spotter is supposed to be doing. Also, you have statisticians, another kind of assistant. Statisticians are putting together the many different kinds of numbers that sports rely on to tell the story, the records that are being broken, the underachieving numbers, etc. Also in sports, you have anchors too. You've seen that on ESPN and other areas. And then you have sideline reporters just designed to be on the sideline, getting to the team, getting it during halftime to the coach, during in between periods to the coach, whatever the sport is. They're trying to get to the coach, to the players, and sometimes fans on the side as well. Yet another kind of position in sports announcing is the public address announcer. The public address announcer, this is the person in the live sport. They're calling the batter up to the plate. They're letting people know about contests that are taking place. They're doing the seventh inning stretch. This is what the PA announcer does. Something that you have to consider if you're going to go into sports announcing is you're saying a lot of the same words over and over and over. Consider if you're a baseball announcer, how many times are you going to say the word strike and ball and out? You'll say those words over and over. So you have to have a love of repetition, but you also have to have a voice that can impart an intonation into those words, which gives them extra special meaning. I mean, you're going to say strike three a whole lot differently than strike one. Strike is the way that you might say it. For example, put that emphasis into the story. All right, and then finally for sports announcers, you have to be able to use metaphors. Metaphors are used all the time to communicate sports. Metaphors are using the experience of a familiar situation to describe an unfamiliar situation. One of the great lines that I heard from baseball, I think you can tell I'm a baseball fan, is Vin Scully, one of the best announcers ever, the Dodgers announcer. He's still alive, only retired a couple years ago. He described a shortstop throwing a ball over to first base as the shortstop lofted a poached egg. Now that is full of imagery, is it not? You can tell what kind of a throw that was to first base if you know what a poached egg is, right? It's a wobbly thing, right? And it went up like this. He threw a poached egg over to first. He didn't throw a bullet, right? So metaphors are very important in sports announcing. Next up is the position of weather announcing. Weather announcing, everyone pays attention to weather. I bet more than half the class paid attention to the weather today, hoping that we would finally get a warm day. We did not. We got another cold one and another windy one. Even though it's clear and beautiful outside, a lot of us are ready for that outdoor weather and get us out of our quarantine situations and not have to put a bunch of clothes on to get out into nature or to take a walk or whatever it is that you do to get out of your house. And it's just one tiny example of a context that exists right now, but people are paying attention to weather all the time. You live in those climates that have hurricanes, tornadoes, bad snowstorms. Those are not the only people paying attention to climate, but of course they are. So the people who go into weather announcing, very typically they are actually broadcast meteorologists. They've done a meteorology degree. We've mentioned before that Penn State is a big university for that. And a lot of times they pass courses and get accredited. They get accredited for their degrees. So they have a certain level of title that is above and beyond a bachelor's degree. With a meteorologist, with a broadcast meteorologist, with a weather announcer, a lot more of the work goes into before the actual broadcast. A lot of preparation goes into predicting weather patterns, to designing weather graphics, and preparing for the newscast. Something you should know about the weather forecast, which I was reminded of by reading the book, is that this is a segment of the newscast that is known as a variable segment. And think of it this way. If you have 30 minutes for your newscast, that's how long you have, from 6:30 until 7 o'clock for the entire newscast, all the news stories. And if 8 of those minutes is going to be advertisements, you're down to 22 minutes, right, to get across all the content, the headlines, the sports news, the education news, whatever news that you have, the lifestyle news. And so you need to be able to hit that mark of 30 minutes exactly. Well, the really strong news, the hard news, you're not going to be able to give back time. That's all measured out very, very well. But when you get to weather, you can expand it or you can shrink it in terms of the time that it takes up in your newscast. And that's how you grab back time if you need it to get to exactly 30 minutes, or that's how you extend your time if you need to. So in other words, that means that the weather announcer has to be a great ad-libber. They need to be able to, on a moment's notice, continue on the conversation and to make it coherent. You also need to work with the green screen in weather announcing. We showed that before. That's the chroma key, as it's also referred to, and that's you have a big green screen that you're standing in front of, but what viewers actually see is the weather map. And there you are in front of that weather map, pointing to this front that's moving from the west coast to the east coast, pointing to that Atlantic backwater that's coming from the Atlantic. You have to do these things in front of a blank screen and be able to master it. And because you're working with the green screen, it's a golden rule. I shouldn't use golden, that's a color, but you should never wear green in weather announcing. All right, we're going up to the next two smaller occupations now. Next up, we have podcasting. Podcasting is basically downloading audio programs from the internet, and you can listen to them more than once. It's not like they're broadcast and then they're gone forever. So the podcasts opened up a whole new avenue of amateurs to get into semi-broadcasting. Some of you in this class have done broadcasting. It opened up that avenue, And podcasting had a lot of promise because of its portability. You can take a show with you. You can go back and get it whenever you want. But until 2016, just a few years ago, even though podcasts were started back in 2004, supposedly by Adam Curry, 2016 is when they really started to hit their mark and be profitable for some people. The more profitable ones are the ones that are video broadcasts because you can work sponsors into them the more. That's why you even see radio programs that are doing video podcasts. They want to have that visual dimension so that it makes it possible for them to monetize their content. It's a very important word in not necessarily in broadcasting, but in the online world. It's how do you make money off of your content, and monetizing is much easier for visual podcasting. Podcasting will continue to grow. It's very interesting how it may be impacting the broadcasting industry in terms of the regimentation of time, because podcasts don't have to be exactly 60 minutes. They don't run exactly on the clock like broadcasts are. We're still seeing how podcasting is playing out in environments like this, where you have an international emergency, essentially, which have forced people into their houses, forced them into the way that they have human contact anymore. You've got a lot more opportunities for people to podcast, and you've got a lot more opportunities for people to listen to podcasts as they're trying to fill their time with worthwhile exercises other than just sitting around and eating. And so podcasting it's in its growth mode right now, and we're going to see how it plays out in your lifetime. Finally, as an occupation for working on air, we have the voiceover, the VO as it is known, where the voice is is heard but not seen. That's a classic definition of a voiceover. It's a polished and unique voice. It's a voice that has character to it. It's a voice that has versatility in some cases, because a lot of the people who do voiceovers, they're like character actors, and they do freelance work. And so they'll be asked to play a very serious father. They'll be asked to play a cartoon. They'll be asked to play a dog. You have to do a lot of things as an accomplished voiceover expert, voiceover artist, I should say. A lot of these people work out of their homes, as do podcasters. They have the technology at home, and in order to supply the content in the way that they need to meet the demand, a lot of them have ISDN lines in their home. That's a certain way of expanding the broadband of your internet so that you can be shipping out your content and not have it bottlenecked and bottled up because you're on a very slow upload speed. So ISDN is used. Talent agencies are involved for people who are really great at voiceovers. You have the SAG-AFTRA union. It's two unions that came together, the Screen Actors Guild and the AFTRA union. I forget what that one stands for. They came together. You're a member of that, and that means that your wages are protected. It means the conditions under which you must work are protected, and there are rules and requirements for that. And that means you're also involved with talent agencies. The talent agencies are going to shop your voice around. You need somebody who can really play a vulnerable child who's in an emergency situation. I've got the perfect artist for that. And then they collect a fee if they sign you to the deal. It's usually 10%. And then there's a new venue online that potential voiceovers can exchange with. It's by Amazon. And it's creative announcers working with what's known as audiobook exchange. And it doesn't involve talent agencies collecting fees. It involves Amazon collecting a standard fee, not a percentage. And that's where you can also explore meeting up your voice with somebody who might be in need of you. A lot of times for voiceovers, you do have to be a well-known person, a well-known celebrity. I mean, you know Seth Rogen's voice if you hear it. You know Nicki Minaj's voice if you hear it. These are distinct voices. And to get your voice to be distinct, it may have to have a natural quality to it automatically, or you may have to spend a lot of time becoming famous. So there you have it, several occupations with working on the air. I hope you're considering doing one or more of these if you go into broadcasting, because often what you're doing is putting them together to achieve a successful and fun career. Have a great night.